All right. All right, guys. So what we did before the break and what you did on the AMI was our 4142. 41 was just determining or telling us whether or not a function is a polynomial function. We're determining if it is or not. Writing it in standard form, stating degree, type, and leading coefficient, and evaluating polynomial functions. 4.2, we went over addition, subtraction, and multiplication. Now we're going to look at dividing polynomial functions. Now there's two ways to divide polynomial functions. One of them is long division, and the other is synthetic. Most like synthetic division over long division. Now long division with these polynomial functions is going to be about a handful of steps that is repeated again and again and again. We do the same process over and over again. And once we get that process, or we see the steps that it works, it's just we're going to keep repeating those steps over and over again. And whenever we divide, we get the whole part, our whole expression out, and we have our remainder, what's left over. If the remainder is 0, we don't have to write it. If it's something other than 0, we have to add it back in. Because there are the first two problems, and again, I need to go back and change and edit these note sheets a little bit, because I did used to go over the 29,682 divided by 13, and it does have some similarity, some connection to it, but I think it's better if we just move on. Yes. Change the 2x from negative to plus, and our x minus 1 to x plus 1. Back of the first page. Back side of the first page, at the top. So you'll need to change the negative 2x to plus 2x, and our x minus 1 to x plus 1. I changed it mainly because of the numbers that we get. First thing we're going to do is write our division bar, division symbol. Our expression that is before the division sign or on top of the fraction is going to go first. So our first term is x cubed. Our second term is our negative x squared. Our positive 2x plus 8. Question? All right, guys. Questions on how we set this up so far? Now, if there are any terms missing, we would add them in as 0x and whatever the power is, or 0. What goes after the division is going to go outside, so our x plus 1. We good with this so far? Now, with polynomial division is a little different than long division when we just have numbers. With polynomial division, we want that first term inside that division symbol to cancel out. We want it to become 0. So to do that, all right, guys, focus in. We need to see what times x will give us x cubed, because we need them to be the same for them to cancel. So our question is, what times x will give us x to the third? X squared. And we're going to put it over the x squared term. Because x squared times x will give us x to the third. It'll cause that first term to cancel out. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that x squared term and multiply it by our expression outside of our division symbol. So we're going to multiply our x plus 1 by x squared. So the first thing we're going to do is x squared times x, which is x to the third, because we want that first term to be exactly what the first term inside the division is. And then we'll do x squared times 1, which is plus x squared. Questions on this so far? Our next step is we're going to take this and put it underneath its like terms. X squared, x cubed plus x squared. Questions on this so far? and we're going to subtract. X cubed minus x cubed is, okay, huh? It is 0, yeah. Because x cubed minus x cubed is indeed 0. It's gone. Now we'll move on to the next one. Negative x squared minus x squared. Negative 1 minus 1 would be negative 2x squared. Any questions on this so far? We have one step left of this first part. Are we ready? We bring the next term down. So, any questions on this so far? So how do we feel about this so far? We feel okay with this here? Are we ready for the next part? We're going to do everything we just did again. That is the whole process. We're just going to keep doing that again and again until we get all the way to the end. Because our next step is to say what times x is now going to give us negative 2x squared. Well, the number in front of our x is what? 1. So what times 1 is negative 2? It would be negative 2. What times x is x squared? It would be x. So what times x is negative 2x squared? It would be negative 2x. And we can multiply through again. Any questions on how we got negative 2x? Because again, the main thing we're trying to do is get those first terms to be the same. In our first step, we wanted to get the x cubes to be the same. That first one to be x cubed and x cubed. Now we want negative 2x squared and negative 2x squared. Well, negative 2x times x. Well, we'll still have the negative 2. Our x times x is x squared. Then we'll do negative 2x times 1, which is, well, negative 2x. And again, we're going to put it underneath. Negative 2x squared minus 2x. And again, we're going to subtract. Negative 2x squared minus 2x squared minus negative 2x squared. Excuse me, it would be 0 because our negative would make a plus. Negative 2 plus 2 is indeed 0. We want that to be 0. 2x minus negative 2x. Well, the negative and negative would make a plus. So 2x plus 2x is 4x. Now, for the most part, we can't do this in the calculator because, again, the 30xs, the graphing calculator, need a value for x. But we can do the coefficients. Because I can grab either calculator and say 2 minus negative 2, and it tells that it is indeed 4. We can do the numbers in front of x. We just can't do the x's. Questions on this here so far? Then we would bring down the 8. And we do this all again. What times x is 4x? Well, the x's are already the same, yes? So we're just seeing what times 1 is 4, which would be 4. So it's just plus 4. Because x is already matching, so it's just what times our x gives us 4x, so it's just 4. And we're going to do this again. We're going to multiply 4 by our x plus 1. Well, our 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 1 is plus 4. And we're going to subtract. 4x minus 4x is 0. 8 minus 4. Questions on what we've done so far? Almost. Because do we have another term to bring down? No, so we're done. Now in normal long division, if you remember back there, we could do a decimal and then put a 0 and keep going on. Here, we're done. We can't do that. This is as far as it goes. Now the 4 is our what? Remainder. Now we do have to add it back in, okay? Are you ready for this? Plus, and we're going to put a fraction bar because we're dividing. Fractions are just another way to divide, yes? What was the remainder? 4. It goes on top. What were we dividing this expression by? The x plus 1, yes? It goes on bottom. That's it. We just add that remainder back in. If the remainder is 0, we don't have to put that in because the remainder is 0. What do we think of this here? Does this look a lot nicer than what you thought this was going to be? Yeah. Because for the most part, this is the same steps again and again and again and again. It's more tedious than it is difficult. Questions on this here? We're ready for the next one. All right. We want to divide. Was everybody finished with the last one? Okay. So we want to divide 2x to the fourth plus 3x cubed plus 5x minus 1 by our x squared plus 3x plus 2. We'll need our division bar, the division symbol. And what goes inside is our expression here. So our first term is 2x to the fourth. Then we have our x cubed term, which is plus 3x cubed. Then we have our x squared term, which is what is the x squared term? 0. We don't have one. We have to put it back in. We need a place for our x squared. Now we do have our x term, which is 5x minus 1. So if we're missing a term, either on the outside or inside this division symbol, we have to put it back in as 0 times whatever that term is. If it's just the number, we put it in as just plus 0. Outside, our first term is x squared. Plus 3x plus 2, all the terms are there. Questions on how we set this up or anything we've done so far? And again, first step, what times x squared gives us 4x to the fourth? Because our x squared to get to x fourth, we have 2 for x squared. X to the fourth, we need 4. So we're missing how many? 2. X squared. And what times x is 2? Would be 2x squared. Does that make sense how we got there? Yes? All right. Now there is something that's a little bit interesting. How many terms do I have outside? 3, yes? So I'm going to start 1, 2, 3 over, yes? So the first one, it would have to be an x squared because we did line them up. And this works as long as what's inside has all the terms there. X to the fourth, x cubed, x squared, x constant. We can line them up that way. Well, it means the term next to it would have to be the term that is what? X and then our number. Because they will line up like that. But even if we don't recognize that or notice it, that's fine because we're just seeing what times x squared gives us 2x to the fourth, which is 2x squared. Questions on this here before we start multiplying again? So again, we're going to multiply the 2x squared by our x squared plus 3x plus 2. We're going to distribute out 2x squared times x squared. So we'll have the 2, x squared times x squared is x to the fourth. 2x squared times 3x, 2 times 3, positive 6. X squared times x is x to the third. And lastly, 2x squared times 2, 2 times 2 is going to be plus 4x squared. And then, like we did on the last one, we're going to subtract. 2x to the fourth minus 2x to the fourth is 0. It's gone. 3x cubed minus 6x cubed. 3 minus 6. Negative 3. And we still have x to the third. 0x squared minus 4x squared. 0 minus 4. Negative 4 x squared. And then we bring our next term down. Questions on what we've done so far? Now we need to see what times x squared gives us what? Negative 3 x cubed. So we would have a negative 3. Because our 1 times negative 3 would give us our negative 3. And what times x squared gives us x cubed? X. Because outside I have 1, or sorry, outside I have 2, inside I need 3. So how many am I missing? 1. So we'd have negative 3x. Questions on how we got the negative 3x? All right. Now we're going to multiply again. Negative 3x times x squared plus 3x plus 2. Negative 3x. Negative 3x times x squared. Well, we'd still have the negative 3. X times x squared would give us x to the third. Negative 3x times 3x. Negative 3 times positive 3 is going to be negative 9. And x times x is x squared. And negative 3x times 2, negative 3 times 2 would be negative 6x. We put it underneath. And again, we're going to subtract. Questions on any of this here so far? Our first thing is going to be negative 3x cubed minus negative 3x cubed. Negative 3 minus negative 3. It's going to be 0. Because our negative negative would have made a positive, so negative 3 plus 3, 3 minus 3 is indeed 0, just like we wanted. Negative 4x squared minus negative 9x squared. Well, negative negative would make a plus, telling us negative 4 plus 9. 9 minus 4 is 5x squared. 30xs can do part of it. We could say negative 4 minus negative 9. It tells us positive 5, so positive 5x squared. And lastly, 5x minus negative 6. Well, the negative negative make a plus. 5x plus 6x is 11x. And again, we bring down the minus 1. Lastly, questions on this here before we move on to the next step? What times x squared gives us 5x squared? 5. And since it's positive, it's going to be plus 5. Since the x squareds already line up, we're just saying what times the number in front gives us the number in front. What times 1 gives us 5, which is 5. And again, we're going to do this one last time. We're going to multiply 5 by our x squared plus 3x plus 2. So 5 times x squared is, well, 5x squared. 5 times 3x, 5 times 3 is going to be plus 15, and we still have our x. And lastly, 5 times 2 is plus 10. Put it underneath and match up our terms. Questions on this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? 5x squared minus 5x squared is 0. 11x minus 15x. 11 minus 15. Negative 4x. Negative 1 minus 10. Do we have any other terms to bring down? And another way we know we're done is how many terms do we have at this point? How many are we dividing by? If it gets smaller than what we're dividing by term-wise, we're done. We can't go any further. Now we have the remainder plus. We put what the remainder is on top, so negative 4x minus 11. And we put our term, or what we're dividing by, on bottom. So our x squared plus 3x plus 10. And that's our answer. Can we agree that this is tedious? Very monotonous. It's a lot of the same steps again and again. Overall difficulty, if we understand each step as we do it, it's not that bad. It's just keeping track of doing it each step again and again and again. Questions on this here? We ready for the next one? Four x to the fourth plus 5x minus 4 is being divided by x squared minus 3x minus 2. We're going to do this one and one more. So we start off with setting the problem up. So we'll have our division symbol. Inside we do have 4x to the fourth. That's our first term. We need our x cubed term. Since we don't have one, we'll plug it in as 0x cubed. We don't have our x squared term, so we need a 0x squared. We do have our x term, so plus 5x. And we do have our constant term, minus 4. Outside, we do have all of our terms. Our x squared minus 3x minus 2. Questions on any of this so far? Now we need to see what times x squared gives us 4x to the fourth. What times x squared gives us 4x to the fourth? 4x squared. Since the number in front of our x squared outside is 1, well, we'll need to multiply by 4 to get to the 4x to the fourth. X squared, we have 2 outside, we have 4 inside, so we're missing 2. So it would be 2x squared. And again, figuring out what to multiply, especially to start, is sometimes the most challenging part of this here. Are there questions on how we got 4x squared, or how we got to that first term? Okay. Now at this point here, we're going to take that 4x squared and multiply it by our x squared minus 3x minus 2. our 4x squared times x squared. Well, we still have the 4. And x squared times x squared is x to the 4th. Now we have 4x squared times negative 3x. 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. X squared times x is x to the 3rd. And lastly, 4x squared times negative 2. 4 times negative 2 is going to be negative 8. And we have x squared. Questions on anything we've done so far? We're going to subtract. 4x to the 4th minus 4x to the 4th. 4 minus 4 is 0, nothing. Because again, we want that first set of terms to cancel out each time when we do this step. 0x cubed minus negative 12x cubed. Well, the negative would make a plus. So 0x cubed plus 12x cubed. 0 plus 12 is 12x cubed. 0x squared minus negative 8x squared. 0 minus negative 8. The negative and negative make a plus. So 0 plus 8 is plus 8x squared. Questions on this so far? Questions on anything we've done so far? And we repeat the steps again. What times x squared gives us 12x cubed? Which is going to be positive 12x. Because to go from 1 to 12, we have to multiply by 12. To go from x squared to x cubed, we need to multiply by x. So we have 12x times x squared minus 3x minus 2. Now our 12x times x squared, so we still have the 12, and x times x squared is going to be x cubed. 12x times negative 3x, 12 times negative 3 is going to be negative 36. X times x would be x squared. And lastly, 12x times negative 2 is going to be negative 24x. And again, just like before, we're going to take this expression and put it underneath it. 12x cubed minus 36x squared minus 24x. $12x cubed minus 12x cubed is 0. That is 0. 8x squared minus negative 36x squared. Well, the negative would make a plus. 8x squared plus 36x squared is 44x squared. 5x minus negative 24x. Again, the negative is going to make a plus, giving us plus 29x. And lastly, we'll bring down the minus 4. Questions on this here? Again, we'll do it one more time. What times x squared is 44x squared? 44. And since the 44 is positive, it's going to be plus 44. Yeah, the numbers got a little big on this one here. And again, we're going to repeat this again. This time we're multiplying through by 44. 44 times x squared is going to be 44. x squared. 44 times negative 3x is going to be negative 132x. And lastly, 44 times negative 2 is going to be negative 88. And again, we're going to subtract. So the first thing we're going to subtract is 44x squared minus 44x squared. 44 minus 44 is 0. That cancels out. 29x minus negative 132x. Well, the negative and negative again will make a plus and gives us 161x. Negative 4 minus negative 88. Negative 4 plus 88 plus 84. Okay. And we take our remainder and add it back in. Questions on this here? How do we feel about this on a whole? Yes. It's once we get the process, it makes it nice, but it is time consuming. There's just a long process to it. Questions on any of this here? There is one last one I want to look at. It is the last problem before the homework. Right there. Yep. Yes.
Is this always going to be in order?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Time?
The only time it wouldn't is if we're missing a term, but we'll add it back in, so it will. Yeah, because the question that was asked was, when we have this here, are these always going to be in descending order? And yes. X to the fourth, x cubed, x squared. X cubed, x squared, x. X squared, x, constant. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And since we have 3 terms that we're dividing by, we'll have 3. If it was 4, we'd have 4. Now this one here, x to the fourth. We don't have our x cubed term, so we'll add in a 0x cubed. We do have our x squared term, so plus 4x squared. Minus, or plus 0x minus 45. So we had to add in our x cubed and x squared term. Funny enough, this one here is one of the outliers. We don't necessarily need the x cubed and x because of how this works, but it's better to put them in there. Now, what's outside, we have x squared plus 0x plus 9. Since we have a spot missing, we'll need to fill it back in. And this is to mainly make sure that we have all of our terms lining up and it's simplifying nicely. Questions on how we set this up? What times x squared gives us x to the fourth? X squared. And we'll put it over our x squared term. And just like we've been doing, we're going to do x squared times our x squared plus 0x plus 9. And we'll distribute. X squared times x squared is x to the fourth. X squared times 0x, well, x times 0 is x, so we'll still have 0. X squared times x is x to the third. And x squared times 9 is going to be plus 9x squared. Now this next step, there's two ways we can do it. I'll probably show you the nicer of the two. X to the fourth minus x to the fourth is 0. Cancels out. 0x cubed minus 0x cubed is 0. Because we can cancel it out, or we can leave it as 0x cubed. We can just go on and cross it out because it is 0, yes? We'll move on to the next one. 4x squared minus 9x squared. Negative 5x squared, yes? Bring down the next term. Questions on this so far? How many terms do we have at this point down there? 2. How many are we dividing by? Do I have enough terms? No, because I only have 2. I need 3 for it to line up, yes? Because how many zeros did we end up having? 2. So we ended up going not to just x, we went one more. Because really that term we skipped was going to end up being 0x. So we would have gotten there anyways. Now the last step, what times x squared is negative 5x squared? Negative 5. Or multiply through by negative 5. Negative 5 times x squared is, well, negative 5x squared. Negative 5 times 0x is, well, it's still 0x, because negative 5 times 0 is 0. We still have our x. Negative 5 times 9, negative 45. Yep, negative 5x squared minus 5x squared, negative 5x squared minus negative 5x squared is 0, yes? 0x minus 0x, still 0. Negative 45 minus negative 45. So the remainder here is so we can write it as x squared plus 0x minus 5. Well, 0x is still just 0. So we can just say x squared minus 5. Questions on this here? The assignment, the massively long assignment, is 5 through 10. Yes. 6 problems. 6 problems.